You're listening to the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. I'm Jan Weller, with you for a couple of hours tonight, and hoping you'll stay with me for, I think, some provocative conversation with a couple of different people, both on the subject of gender relations. This hour we have the privilege of talking with Warren Farrell, who is the author of a best-selling book called The Myth of Male Power, one which has raised a lot of eyebrows in both the women's movement and the burgeoning men's movement as well. Warren Farrell used to be a board member of the National Organization for Women. He was in that post for 3 years, and in fact used to be known as one of the more outspoken men in favor of women's rights. But over time, he began to realize that there was a certain inequity in the way that the feminists' message was being put across to the public at large. And as he started to try to rectify those inequities, he became less and less popular as a speaker before women's groups. Well, ultimately, he has now become one of the leading spokespeople in the growing men's movement, although he prefers really to look at his work as something that should bring the genders together. In fact, he calls it a gender transition movement. Warren Farrell is a widely experienced man. He has been active in a number of different fields over the years. He has taught at the School of Medicine at the University of California at San Diego, and has also taught psychology, sociology, and political science at Georgetown, Rutgers, and Brooklyn College. He is a popular figure on the various talk shows, Donahue, Oprah, etc., and has also appeared in some of the major magazines and newspapers of this country. His book, The Myth of Male Power, is published by Simon & Schuster, and you should be able to find it quite easily in your local bookstore. But for the time being, don't worry about that, and instead sit back and listen to what he has to say, and I hope take part in our conversation as well. The number to use if you're in Milwaukee tonight is 271-8655. From anywhere else, join us toll-free at 1-800-486-8655. Toll-free, 1-800-486-8655. Dr. Farrell, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, it's nice to be with you, and especially your introduction was so nicely balanced. It was exactly the way I would have wanted myself represented, so I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate your saying so. I'm never quite sure how much I've offended my guests in my introductions.
Not at all.
Anyway, let me ask you about how someone who used to be so much identified with feminism has now become so much identified, rightly or not, as on the opposite side of the feminist movement.
Yes, I never see it as being on the opposite side. I've always, my interest in feminism right from the outset was that I thought it would free both sexes from stereotyped sex roles, and I never felt that stereotyped sex roles benefited much of anybody except people that coincidentally happened to fall into those roles. And so and I think the women's movement just did a much better job in helping opening up options to women than it did opening up options to men. But unfortunately, in the process, the good part of the women's movement is that it really has helped empower tens of thousands, millions, really, of women do things that they wouldn't have been able to think of themselves as doing in the 1950s. And that part I will never take away from it, or never take away from the little bit of contribution that I helped make to that process. And I support feminism to the degree that it focuses on those types of empowerment issues. Where I deviate from feminism is that we as feminists, we looked at the female role and the male role. We said basically that men had the power and women didn't, and men had privilege and oppressed, and women were oppressed. You know what I mean?
That the men oppressed and women were oppressed.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Always helpful to have. Let's see, and what I missed in that process was the fact that, historically speaking, neither sex had power. Both sexes had roles, and women's role was raise the children, and men's role was raise the money. And but as feminists, we came to understand the sacrifice that was involved in women's role of bearing children and raising children, but we never understood the sacrifice that was involved in men's role of raising money. So we called the sacrifice power rather than calling it sacrifice. And so I came to understand that just as Betty Friedan had recognized that the women's movement had a problem, and the problem had no name. The problem with men was that we had a problem, and our problem had a deceptive name. Our experience of sacrifice or powerlessness, we called it power. We called sacrifice, earning money that we did by obligation, power, and that threw us. That made us even more. It made it even less accessible to change that.
You call it sacrifice, but we get the impression that most men like it that way. That men enjoy making money, that they enjoy the game of competition in the business world, assuming that's where they make their money, and that this is a role that they relish. Is that not the case?
It is the case for many men, and it is. And let's look at that from the perspective of what we learned from the women's movement in the 50s. If we had done a survey of women in the 1950s and asked them how many of you would prefer to be would like to be homemakers rather than anything else, or what would you like to be, about 95% would have said homemakers. And the women's movement said, no, stop there. That's not a fair question at this point in history, because the only option we've offered these women for approval from their parents, their peers, their friends, and so on, is if you're a homemaker, honey, we'll love you. And if you go off and try to be some type of career woman, you're going to alienate men, etc., and you're going to be like a man, and you're going to be you're going to be a tomboy, and you're going to be this and that, and therefore we won't approve of you. Now we're asking you the question, what would you like to be? And about 95% of women will conform to what they know gives them approval and love.
And you're saying men do the same thing when it comes to their traditional roles in life?
Yes, I'm saying two things in relation to that. One is that all men and all women do what they know gives them approval. We've opened the approval system for women. We haven't opened it for men. Secondly, the area of homemaker and earning money has a great deal of, both of them have great deals of rewards to them when they're done well, especially by people who do them well, either naturally or have learned to do them well. But because raising children and being a homemaker has lots of rewards in it for lots of women, doesn't mean we need to make all women do it. And reverse, because many men do enjoy making money, doesn't mean we need to make all men do it.
So in other words, now we've reached a point where, at least conceivably, women can either be homemakers or they can go into the workplace and be career women, whereas men still only have the option, basically, of being in the workplace and not staying at home and raising the kids. Is that what you're saying?
Precisely. That when a successful middle-class man and woman meet each other, just if go think about your friends that you knew, and usually the first 2-3 years that we see them that they're married, that they usually have a pretty egalitarian relationship, and they sort of almost often brag about it. And then after a few years, one day you go over for a dinner party or whatever, and they say, guess what? We have an announcement. Mary's pregnant, and everybody's happy. And shortly thereafter, you start hearing discussions, and the discussion usually revolves around, if Mary is more traditional, she's sort of saying, well, I really think it's important for the children to have a mother full-time, and she starts considering full-time mothering. If she's less traditional, more career woman, she considers full-time career. If she's somewhere caught between the two worlds, she usually considers some way of juggling both of those worlds, maybe taking off from work outside the home for about a year, then maybe being involved with the children part-time and work for part-time for about a year after that, and then going back to work for about for a while until maybe a second child comes, and then repeating that whole dilemma and process. Now, the important part of that is that the woman is considering three options: work full-time, children full-time, or some combination of both. Her husband is usually sitting there supporting her, considering those options, and we're all unconsciously unaware that he is really considering three, quote, slightly different invisible options. Option one is work full-time, option two is work full-time, and option three is work full-time. and yet we have this, we've entered into this era of the multi-option woman and the no-option man, and especially among the middle-class women, without realizing that this insight is the key to understanding what has happened in the last 25 years, which was that it was not the most oppressed group of people that became that has been free to seek these options. It was in fact the middle-class woman married to the successful man. The man provided enough income to allow her to look at the world not in purely survival terms, and not in having to be a baby machine and a cleaning machine, but has allowed her to do things like read "I'm Okay, You're Okay" and books, and go to psychologists and watch Oprah Winfrey shows and read magazines and novels and so on and grow. But meantime, her husband was doing very little of this because he was so preoccupied with producing the money that freed her to criticize him and then eventually divorce him. But the problem then became that she, being as a divorced woman, was usually not 20 anymore. She was usually more like 40. Her husband was more likely to be addicted, or new men in the marketplace of single people were more likely to be addicted to 220s than 140, if you know what I mean. And that made her angry at men. Also, she oftentimes had not prepared herself adequately for the workplace that she was now being dumped back into.
Right.
And that made her angry also.
And these are legitimate grievances.
Those are legitimate grievances, and they were grievances that served her well historically when there was no option for divorce on his part or her part, because historically his income was her income. And so the more there was discrimination in favor of him at the workplace, the more there was discrimination in favor of her in the home because his income was hers. And so the mistake that we made about male income was that male income served males. Male income was usually produced by the sacrifice that men made, the fact that some men liked it and some men didn't. And we tend to think, especially among liberals, we tend to compare the woman with the corporate head, or the head of a company. Aside from the fact that he usually works 70 to 90 hours a week, in addition to that, we miss completely the garbage collector, the person who's cleaning out our sewers, the construction worker, one of whom dies every single workplace hour in the United States alone. And we have legislation that does a lot more to protect women against dirty jokes than we have to protect men against the faulty rafters that lead to their death.
Well, there have been plenty of instances, though, of women being exploited in the workplace. I mean, after all, going way back in history, the sweatshops, the garment industry workers who were forced to work for slave wages. I realize that sort of situation doesn't exist anymore, except for perhaps immigrant women. I understand there are new sweatshops of that sort now, but
sure,
but I mean, it's not like women have been totally immune from that kind of subjugation either, have they?
No, neither sex has really been immune from much of anything. Historically speaking,
Yeah.
both sexes had it very hard until after World War II. Basically, no one had the option of focusing on anything but survival. And so one of the first things that I'm explaining in the myth of male power is that that the patriarchy versus matriarchy paradigm is a paradigm that needs fundamental questioning. And I'm proposing as an alternative of a stage 1, stage 2 paradigm. The stage 1 aspect of that, meaning that when we were focused on survival issues in stage 1, then neither sex had power. Both sexes had the roles that I was mentioning before.
Are you saying they evolved naturally because of that?
Evolved naturally. Explain that a bit more.
Well, you're saying in previous types of society, men virtually had to be the laborers and women had to be the homemakers?
Yeah, well, pretty not so much homemakers per se, but because women bore the children.
Right, the child rearers.
The child rearers, the child creators. That biological role created both a biological role for them and then also a social role for men. But because the social role was harder to get men to play, we had to give men incentives to play that. And among the incentives we gave men to play that was we told them that if they did things like went out and got themselves killed in war, we would give them a medal to do that. We would respect them. Women would love them. So we never had a legend in which the beautiful princess married the conscientious objector. You know what I mean?
Actually, connected to that, though, I wanted to ask you about something you said a bit earlier. You referred to a little earlier. You said men are addicted to, when the wife turns 40, they are addicted to the 220s instead of the 40. In other words, you're saying that they are, and that was your word, addicted to younger women, or I think you say in your book they're addicted to beautiful women. I mean, that's sort of a bizarre way of putting it, isn't it, to talk about them being addicted to women? Isn't this, in fact, a flaw on the part of men that they only go after beautiful women? I mean, that would offend a lot of people.
Well, I agree with you that it's a flaw, and that's to me, addictions are flaws. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, but I mean, they do this willingly, don't they? I mean, men do tend to value physical appearance more than, or at least that's what they say, than women do. Perhaps that's an unfortunate stereotype.
Well, I think it's first of all, it's true that men are more focused on women's physical appearance than the other way around, and that has been true in almost all cultures historically throughout time. But part of that is probably biological, and part of that is reinforced by the socialization process. But the important part of that, in terms of the word addiction, is that virtually every culture has figured out a way of, in essence, reinforcing the male's the tendency to already their tendency to focus on two aspects of women: the young woman and the beautiful woman. The young woman that was functional historically for cultures to addict the males to, because if he was addicted to the young woman, he would lose his rational ability, which is what an addiction applies, to make an intelligent decision. He would then marry that woman when she was very young, and in exchange for sex with someone who was beautiful and young. Beautiful represented good genes, basically, and young represented maximum numbers of years of fertility. And by addicting men to this, that's the only way you could get them to make a decision to, in exchange for 1 year of sex, one hour of sex, let's say, in exchange for that 1 hour of sex, to promise to support a woman for a lifetime who they basically barely knew, and to support children for a lifetime who they hadn't yet met. And in addition to that, if the woman withdrew from them sexually after that, they'd still be obligated to do that. They had no way out. Now, if you thought about that, most people wouldn't do that. So you had to sort of have your brains drop out of your head into your penis.
You make it sound like this is some sort of conscious plot on the part of someone, though, to construct this scenario.
It's a conscious plot on the part of the needs of survival. It was not a plot on the part of men or the part of women. Women had the same, in a sense, had to make that same type of decision in a different type of way.
So you're saying nature, in a sense, led men and women to take on these roles?
It was not just. I mean, the roles were sort of naturally created, but the how to say the dominant force was not women or men. It was that those Jews or Mormons or whatever group it was that didn't produce, or Catholics that did not produce more of their own, had that group die out. And so the Pope was not in favor of birth control. He was in favor of having more Catholic children, and so the groups and so there was that both women and men who didn't obey that rule were ostracized seriously, which is why homosexuality, bestiality, and masturbation were all ostracized, while at the same time the Bible, and in the Lot and daughter story and the Rachel and Jacob story, blesses the incest and the rape that the daughters did of Lot the father. Basically, in essence, the daughters of Lot on consecutive nights got the fathers drunk, and each one on separate nights, when he was asleep, had sex with him, which if a man had sex with a woman when she was asleep, we call it rape. And so they reverse that process. This is incest and rape, and the offspring is Moab, which we call, which in Hebrew means of the father. It's a celebration of the rape and incest relationship.
So you're saying, are you saying even the Bible reflects these kinds of societal pressures?
Precisely, and even whether it's the Bible, the Christian Bible, or whether it's the Torah and the mitzvah, the first commandment is be fruitful and multiply. That's the first commandment of the mitzvah of the Torah. Basically, the Bible and Darwinism doesn't make any difference where you are on the spectrum. It's all the same.
Except someone who's religious would say then that if what you say is correct, that means that God wants it this way as well.
Well, yes, in essence, God, God in the sense that whether you believe in God as a literal being or as a metaphor, God was interested in survival, and so was, and Darwin suggested that the species in different senses were interested in survival. But now, for the first time in human history, we have the option to do different types of choices. And what I am saying in the myth of male power is that the choices, that the genetic heritage we had led us to choosing men who were basically killers to protect, because the killers killed beasts and they killed off people that threatened that society.
Mm-hmm.
And so the women fell in love with the warriors and the princes, the people that could protect them and kill off other enemies. And the men fell in love with the beautiful young women. Those were functional. But now, for the first time in human history, that's choosing men who killed used to lead to survival of the fittest. With nuclear technology, choosing men who kill leads to the potential destruction of everyone. So for the first time in human history, our genetic heritage is in fundamental conflict with the genetic future. And that's why I'm saying that a whole new paradigm in the myth of male power, of what power is about, needs to be constructed.
Yeah, although you'd seem to be saying that there's been resentment about these roles for many years. And if, in fact, we are only recently in a society constructed where men might also have more options, how does that explain unhappiness with these delegated roles over history?
Well, in some ways there was and wasn't unhappiness with the delegated roles. It sort of was a tough one to look at. Basically, people didn't allow themselves to ask the question, am I happy? That's more a stage 2 question.
But if they did, would they have answered yes or no, do you think?
Probably they would have answered yes, but in the type of way that the women in the 1950s would have said, yes, I'm happy.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. So you're saying, in fact, they were chafing against these roles for maybe centuries.
Well, sort of yes and sort of no. I mean, it's sort of like you didn't know any better. You learned to follow the program, and at the same time, there were hints of happiness, and there were hints of enormous unhappiness. Everyone, almost every society you had the affairs, and in almost every society you had people drinking enormously, and the moment they had a chance to go to a festival, they just blew their minds out. If you know what I mean.
But I guess what I'm saying is that you seem to be implying that there is something very unnatural, even biologically unnatural, about men having had these traditional obligations over the years, whatever function they may have had in society, that there's something basically unfair and unnatural about men having to take on those roles.
Well, I don't know that unfair or unnatural would be some things I would say. It certainly is not functional for our present ability of both sexes to be able to choose who they want to be. And I'm saying, historically speaking, that was not an option that was available to people. And now, for the first time in human history, what we've done, I remember doing a workshop about a year ago, actually a few years ago, which is really one of the things that led to the myth of male power. And it was, I had just finished working with the people in the group on the importance of women being able to determine what types of things they wanted to do with their life and how to control and empower themselves, etc. And I started to turn my back on the audience and do the next exercise, get ready for the next exercise and give them a break. I just turned around and something occurred to me. I said, by the way, we've just been talking about what we as women want to do. By the way, how many of us here have ever asked our dad the question, Dad, if you didn't have me in the family to support, what would you have liked to have done with your life if you could have done anything that you wanted to do or anything you wanted to be? And there was like total silence in the workshop, and just 3 people out of about 150 raised their hand and said they had ever even asked their dad the question, Dad, what would you have liked to have been if you could have done anything that you wanted to with your life and didn't have me in the family to support? And then I started, and then some people said, well, my dad, I'm sure he would have wanted to do just what he wanted, just what he did. And then I posed the 1950s women would all choose the same thing objection. Right. And so I said, go beyond that. Think about when your dad was really happy, and maybe he did something in a different area altogether. Make believe he didn't have any money to worry about for a while.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people came up and said things like, he would have loved to fish or played golf or been a writer or been a scholar or been a Jewish rabbi, but not have to, have a whole congregation to worry about, or he would have loved to have just been in the woods, etc.
Right.
Almost all things of which didn't make as much money as he did make.
Well, I guess, and so what I'm saying is that what I hear within what you're talking about here is the underlying assumption that basically men have never really enjoyed having this mantle of responsibility placed on them.
Well, whether or not they've enjoyed it, they haven't had the power.
Yeah, I understand that.
And what I'm saying about that power is the ability to control your own life.
Yeah.
And controlling your own life involves the same process that women have learned is involved in controlling one's own life. Is the first thing you do is you don't go outside yourself and look for outside social instructions. You go inside yourself and say, who am I? What are my values? What does my soul tell me is important to me? And then you work from that gut to try to do something that helps you to be able to at least make enough income to survive on or contribute to the family.
Yeah. I want to pause now and give people a chance to talk with you directly, Warren
Sure.
Farrell. We're talking with Warren Farrell, who is the author of The Myth of Male Power, and before that, Why Men Are the Way They Are. Both of them bestsellers, and Warren Farrell is with us for the rest of this hour to talk about why he says men don't, in fact, have all the power, that feminism has painted men in an unfair light, and that, in fact, men are just as exploited as women in many ways. What do you think about this? Are you in sympathy with Dr. Farrell's point of view, or do you disagree with it? Either way, we'd like to hear from you tonight. 1-800-486-8655 is your toll-free number from anywhere in or out of Wisconsin. If you're in Milwaukee and vicinity, you can join us at 271-8655, 271-8655. I'm Jan Weller, and this is the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio.
This is Alex Molnar. Join me every Sunday at 11 a.m. for engaging conversation about important educational issues. Advertising in the classroom, homeschooling, youth violence, private firms running public schools. Those are just some of the topics that we've taken up on Alex Molnar on Education, right here on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio.
I'm going to be taking a week or so off, and Ben Merens will be sitting in this chair for a week, and on Monday we'll be talking about human rights in China and its relationship to trade sanctions against China. Ben will be dealing with that subject Monday evening at 7 here on the Ideas Network. Right now we're talking about men's rights and actually more broadly a more equal set of rights between the two genders. With us tonight, Warren Farrell, who is the author of The Myth of Male Power. It questions the assumption that men have all the power in our society. Warren Farrell is with us for the rest of this hour, and you can join us by telephone if you'd like to speak with him at 271-8655 in Milwaukee or 1-800-486-8655, toll-free from anywhere else in or out of Wisconsin. We'll take a call for you from Milwaukee first. Hi.
Hi, I just have three short comments I'd like to make. First, I'd like to thank you for having someone in the media come out and say this. I've been waiting for that to happen for years.
Thank you.
And second, you said it was like an addiction, and I remember I used to, when I was laid off, I used to watch like Oprah and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they weren't talking about something other than men and women relations, when they were doing it, the men were always portrayed in a bad light, so to speak.
Yes.
And women are always right. No matter what they said or what they wanted, they always got what they wanted. And it was, I don't know, people don't seem to see it.
No, it really is shocking to watch the shows and see, especially, I mean, the worst offender is probably Sally Jesse Raphael, and the second worst is is Geraldo Rivera, who's always playing the rescuer and the savior of women, and then Oprah and Donahue do the same thing. I mean, it's really just astonishing the lack of responsibility that is asked of women. Today there was a program on Oprah, at least it came into San Diego today, not on Oprah, but on Donahue, in which there was an exception to that rule, but rarely speaking, does that occur.
And I'd like to share my experiences with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm married. My wife owns her own business. We have 3 kids. She has now kicked me out of the house.
Wow.
And she's had an affair, and she has a psychologist that tells her how wonderful she is.
Wow.
And in reality, we have a communication problem. It takes 2 people to communicate, but
yes.
It seems to be my fault.
I'm really sorry. Do you also see a therapist?
Yeah.
Yes. And what is his or her reaction to this?
Well, I'm not seeing one. No, I can't seem to find a therapist that will
really
actively help me.
Yes. Yes.
They seem to. It seems either they're dragging it on because they'll make more money, or I think that they just, they just listen and they're not. I don't know.
Yes. I really encourage you to get in, maybe start and form a men's group through either putting an ad in the paper or through either a church group if you belong to a church. But it's really important to be able to talk those issues out and get support at that time. I hope that. Have you read The Myth of Male Power yet?
No, but I read your book, Why Men Are the Way They Are, and I thought it was a really good book. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. I hope the new one is helpful to you also.
Let me just ask, obviously, Milwaukee, your story sounds sad, but of course we don't know everything that's happened within your marriage. Aren't there legitimate reasons, Warren Farrell, for a wife to leave her husband? And I'm not saying that's the case here, but does it automatically make women the villains in a situation like this if something like that happens? Maybe her therapist is saying she's wonderful.
Do you also see a therapist?
Yeah.
Yes. And what is his or her reaction to this?
Well, I'm not seeing one. No, I can't seem to find a therapist that will
really
actively help me.
Yes. Yes.
They seem to. It seems either they're dragging it on because they'll make more money, or I think that they just, they just listen and they're not. I don't know.
Yes. I really encourage you to get in, maybe start and form a men's group through either putting an ad in the paper or through either a church group if you belong to a church. But it's really important to be able to talk those issues out and get support at that time. I hope have you read The Myth of Male Power yet?
No, but I read your book, Why Men Are the Way They Are, and I thought it was a really good book. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. I hope the new one is helpful to you also.
Let me just ask, obviously, Milwaukee, your story sounds sad, but of course we don't know everything that's happened within your marriage. Aren't there legitimate reasons, Warren Farrell, for a wife to leave her husband? And I'm not saying that's the case here, but does it automatically make women the villains in a situation like this if something like that happens? Maybe her therapist is saying she's wonderful because she finally took control of her life and did something that she had been wanting to do for whatever reason and hadn't been able to find within herself.
Well, you're right, but men do not have, I don't have any options.
You're saying men wouldn't be able to get away with the same thing?
No. If I kicked my wife out of the house and had an affair, I would be a tug.
Yeah. Warren Farrell?
Yeah, I think, there's a few things here. One is that the larger picture he's painting is that many times therapists they hear one side of the story, and I know when I work with couples, and if I hear one side of the story, I'm always amazed at how much I have missed when I until I hear the second side of the story, if you know what I mean, whether it's a woman or a man I'm listening to.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think that what happens with the children issue is that so many, oftentimes when there are children involved, if the man cares at all about having contact with the children, he is almost totally at mercy of whether the woman wants that contact to happen or not.
Right.
I have seen just so many horror stories in which, when the woman and man can work it out, that's fine. The law doesn't get involved. But when they can't, and the woman wants to keep those children from the man, it's almost impossible for for a judge today to be able to enforce him being able to see the children. And so what happens for many men is that that the woman gets the children if she wants them, then she gets the house to keep the children in and keep herself in. Then so he's paying mortgage money on a house he doesn't live in, also pays for an apartment, also pays for child support.
Right.
If he wants the children, and even if he gets the children, he almost never has child support awarded to him if the woman, for example, is making a good living and doesn't want to be.
But isn't that only if the man has been shown to be an abuser or something in the relationship?
No, I wish that were true, and that would certainly seem to be equitable. The statement that you're making, Jan, would certainly seem to be what should be. But one of my first deviations from the women's movement was in the late 70s when half of the states in the United States, now chapters, came out opposed to joint custody as a starting block for relationships because they wanted the woman to have the option of whether she would have the children and therefore the income or not have the children and the income.
But part of, beyond the child custody question, isn't one of the reasons for alimony that, like it or not, our society has been structured for so many years in such a way that women have found it harder when they get divorced to go out and find a job right away because they haven't had the experience in the workplace and in many cases are at a disadvantage.
Sure, absolutely, and alimony is not something that needs to be eliminated automatically. What happens, but one of the things I think we can do that we haven't thought about doing in the past is when a man and a woman get divorced, usually the female biggest single fear is economic deprivation, and the male biggest single fear is emotional deprivation. And so at that point in time, so many women respond to that by saying, okay, I want the children, I want the house, and I want the man's income, and I want him to support me as I don't work. And what would often, I think, be more empowering for the woman was to have, if anything, a bias in favor of, say, for the first 2 or 3 years or however long it takes her to build her economic base, to have support to build that economic base for the first 2 or 3 years, to have the preference, if anything, for the man to have the children because he is usually emotionally wiped out because all of his emotional eggs are usually in the basket of women. And then when the woman is lost to him and the children are lost to him at the same time, he's usually a basket case. And yet what we saddle with him with is more economic focus, which then turns him into even more of an economic machine. And then if he starts to date, he's the one having to pay for the date, so that turns him into even more of an economic machine. And so he becomes more of the same, and then the women complain that men are even more like they used to be, rather than more free and more different, and more connected and more soulful. Yeah. And so we're reinforcing the old roles by doing the preference for the woman to have whatever she wants. Now, if there's problems between the woman and the man, and he wants custody and she doesn't, she can always just say to him, you press this any further and I'll accuse you of sexual molestation. And he is wiped out. And most men, they hear that and they know that the only thing that has to happen is the mention of that in public, and he'll lose his job.
Well, there's starting to be a sort of a backlash against that for that very reason, though, isn't there? There's a lot of question about false allegations and that sort of thing.
There's beginning to be questions, Jan, fortunately, about false allegations, but no one is, for example, in The Myth of Male Power, one of the things that I published that because I got it in a window of time before this man was ostracized from the Air Force, was the U.S. Air Force study of 556 rape allegations against men in the Air Force, of which 26% of the women eventually acknowledged openly that they had lied about their allegations of rape, and then another totaling 60% in all were highly suspected of having made false allegations.
Now, that doesn't negate the problem of rape in our society.
Oh, no, Jan. You and I would both, I was hoping that wasn't even needed to be said. I don't think anyone listening to
mention rape or think that it, or in any, and we also have to understand that when a woman says that she is raped, there's two possible things that happen. The victim of rape is possibly seeking a false accusation, in which case he is a victim, and that to keep her and his identity be exposed, and if therefore be suspected of rape for the rest of his life, whether his name is Gary Dotson or William Smith or Mike Tyson, and be subject to being by the head, is not equal. It's not being protected by the Fourth Amendment's due process, protecting both sexes equally. It's a violation of the 14th Amendment and the Fourth Amendment.
Thank you for your call, Milwaukee, and we will continue our conversation with Warren Farrell. Take more phone calls in just a moment, right here on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio.
You'll hear a broad range of viewpoints on today's issues on the Ideas Network. With challenging hosts and well-informed guests, we cover the issues from all sides of the political spectrum, and we invite you to join in the discussion on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio.
A truly balanced evening tonight here on the Ideas Network, because in the next hour we'll be talking with an outspoken feminist, although she will definitely be speaking from a more tongue-in-cheek point of view, and I mean that in more than one way, because the title of her latest book is Get Your Tongue Out of My Mouth, I'm Kissing You Goodbye. Cynthia Heimel will be our guest in our next hour, a satirical columnist for The Village Voice and, believe it or not, Playboy magazine. And she'll be with us to lend us her caustic thoughts on society's foibles and, admittedly, relationships between men and women. She does consider herself a feminist of sorts, and we'll have her after the news at 8 here on the Ideas Network. In the meantime, we continue our conversation with Warren Farrell, the author of the best-selling book, The Myth of Male Power, and before that, Why Men Are the Way They Are. Dr. Farrell is a man experienced in many different areas. He is formerly a member of the board of the National Organization for Women, but has become known for his leadership in the growing men's movement, and has taught, among other things, psychology, sociology, and political science at various universities, and also has been at the School of Medicine at UC San Diego. Give us a call if you'd like to join us with your thoughts and questions for Warren Farrell at 271-8655 in Milwaukee, 1-800-486-8655, toll-free from anywhere else in or out of Wisconsin. Elmwood, you're next. Hi.
Hello, Jan. This is Michael Ellis. I was on your program back on January 28th.
Right, and in fact, I think it was your appearance that led us to book Warren Farrell. That's correct.
Michael Ellis, who originated this whole program here.
That's right. And my question for Mr. Farrell is really maybe if he could explain a little bit more about some of the other organizations that he's involved with. Now, he's on the board of directors for the Children's Rights Council, along with the former president of the National Organization of Women, Karen DeCrow. And I would like maybe he could explain a little more about that particular organization. We do not have a state chapter here in Wisconsin. I'd like to know his thoughts are about the future of the Children's Rights Council and the Men's Health Network, which is another organization he's involved with.
Okay. Thanks a lot for your call, Michael.
Sure.
Warren Farrell?
Well, first of all, the Children's Rights Council, I think, like the National Congress for Men and Children and the National Coalition of Free Men, those are all organizations that are concerned with that we not automatically have the assumption that when a man and woman are divorced, that the father automatically be subject to whatever category the woman wants to put him in, and the importance of that is just I'm just doing research for when I did the research for the Myth of Male Power, I was just astonished in researching the differences between the outcomes of children that have constant father attention versus those that don't. I mean, I knew on some level that children didn't fare as well, but I didn't realize that children didn't fare as well whether they were boys or girls in every single subject area. I didn't realize that children didn't fare as well whether or not when the socioeconomic brackets and the intelligence of the parents were controlled for. I didn't realize that they were more likely to commit homicide, suicide, more likely to have children out of wedlock, even when they didn't want to have children out of wedlock. They were much more likely to end up in insane asylums, to be unstable, to be on drugs, and so and much more likely to be criminals and in prison. And so, in fact, the highest single correlation that I've been able to see between criminality and lack of criminality is the absenteeism of the father. And you can see this just in a pure gut-level way in terms of what's happened to the black community in the last 25 years. With now we have 25% of the black males are in the prison system, which is a higher percentage of black males than are in the college system, and that has increased steadily year by year as we've supported poor women.
Now, you're not talking about 25% of all black males in the country, are you?
No, I'm talking about 25% of all black males who are, I think it's in the younger age males, I think it's between 20 and 30, are in the prison system. They're either in prison on probation, in some way.
Across the country, not just in certain socioeconomic groups?
You are correct. Wow. Across the country. It's just amazing. And that's a statistic very easily check-outable through the NAACP. But that's a higher percentage of black males than in that 20 to 30-year age bracket that are in the college system.
You know, I can't believe how fast this hour has gone, Warren Farrell. I wonder if we could move on to the men's health question that Michael Ellis just raised, which, again, was the reason we had him on the program previously, so that's obviously an area of interest of his. You claim that despite claims on the part of the women's movement that women's health issues have been ignored over the years, that medical research is always geared toward men and ignores women as subjects for research, that in fact you think women's health issues have gotten much more emphasis than men's over the years.
Yeah, this I must say, when I was doing the research for the Myth of Male Power, I really believed this at the beginning, and I started just to do things like, look at the Index Medicus and find that there were more articles written on women than on men, but that didn't convince me very much. Then I was a very strong supporter, and still am, of breast cancer research, but I also then was shocked to see that almost as many men die of prostate cancer as do women of breast cancer, yet there is 660% more funding for breast cancer than there is for prostate cancer.
Well, you can't fund every disease equally, can you?
Well, you can't fund every disease equally, practically speaking, but it was helpful for me to see that, for example, men die earlier of all 15 causes of death. And so, but I was reading things that said, okay, men die earlier of all 15 causes of death, but only 10% of the NIH budget is spent on women's health issues. So I thought that seems pretty unfair. But then I checked with the women's department of the NIH and said what percentage of the NIH budget is devoted to men's health issues, and they said 5%. This is the women's department's interpretation, and I realized that what I was reading was statistics that were misleading me.
Well, where's the rest of it? What is it, 85% that's left? Yeah, where's that go?
85% is for basic science research, things like cellular research, blood research, things that can lead to discover immune system breakdown research, things that can lead to helpful discoveries for both men and for women. And so then I started looking more carefully at things like I was hearing Hillary Clinton say, well, heart disease is an equal opportunity employer, so to speak. That, and as far as that statement goes, it's accurate. That is, equal numbers of women and men do die of heart attacks or heart disease. But what she was not telling us, which therefore made it very disingenuous, is that the average woman who dies of a heart attack or heart disease dies of a heart attack or heart disease at the age of 80, by which point in time the average man has already been dead for 8 years. And so she wasn't also telling us that at the age of 65 or before, men still die of heart disease at a rate of 3 to 1 vis-a-vis women. And so these sort of superficial statements that we were getting were making us very angry toward men and to the medical community as if they were discriminating against women. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I hate to cut you off, but there's so many things I wanted to get to tonight, and we're obviously not going to have time for. Let me just ask you very quickly about another controversial area, and that is sexual harassment. You claim that men are caught in a double bind here, and while I can see your point, it seems to me there is true sexual harassment. I don't think we can deny that.
Well, A, number one, there is. B, number two, the first part of the chapter on that issue in the myth of male power, I not only acknowledge that, but also work with men to understand why sexual harassment is such a different issue for men than it is for women than it is for men.
Yeah.
And then I explain how the dilemmas that the feminist movement has not looked at vis-a-vis sexual harassment.
Well, tell us that.
Okay, one example is about 70% of women who are single when they enter the workplace and who marry a man in the workplace or through a workplace contact. Now, that man is usually a man above her who is usually the person by social expectation who's expected to take the sexual initiative. So when he takes the sexual initiative and is above her, he fits two categories. One is the category of potential candidate for husband, and one is the category of potential candidate for sexual harassment lawsuit. If the process works, we tend to call it courtship, and if it works for a long period of time, we call it a wedding, and her picture is in the paper. If it doesn't work, we call it a lawsuit with his picture in the paper. And so what is not being, now the solution that I work with, and I'm doing one of these tip of the iceberg types of statements here, trying to get this stuff done quickly.
Yeah.
But solution-wise, what I'm saying is that what we need in the workplace is communication, not legislation. That the nuance of male-female communication means that there's lots of sexual contact, indirect and direct, going on all the time.
Yeah.
What we have chosen to, the word sexual harassment implies a punishment of the outgrowth of the direct initiatives historically taken by men.
Right. So you're saying
without a punishment of the indirect initiatives or a questioning of the indirect initiatives taken by women. So I'm not in favor of punishing either one. I'm saying that the legislative system with its black-white win-lose situation is not up to the nuance involved in the sexual communication system.
Yeah, the basic point being that men are still expected to take the initiative, but if they do it in the wrong way, they can be accused of harassment. That's what you're saying.
And that real liberation would be re-socializing women to share the responsibility for taking the initiatives rather than telling men, okay, we still expect you to take the initiatives, but if you don't do it quickly enough, we're going to call you a wimp, and if you do it too quickly, we're going to put you in jail.
And if you and some men really are just total
some men are
brutes about it, aren't they?
Some men are jerks, and when I do my workshops around the country, I have women and men reverse the roles. Women risk the sexual initiative taking, men be much more cautious, and women turn into jerks within a 15-minute period. Because anyone who tries to initiate a conversation on a personal level is so fearful of rejection that they often end up becoming a jerk in the process of stumbling over themselves to not appear like a jerk. You know what I mean?
I hope we can have you back again sometime, Warren Farrell, because
and you're a terrific interviewer, and literally anytime you schedule me back, I'll be happy to come back.
Great. Well, listen, we'll fit in one more phone call before we do run out of time, and that's from Madison. And make it quick, please.
Hi. I have a question regarding Susan Faludi's book, Backlash. I'd like to ask your opinion on the message of that book and the fact that it seems like men are rejecting the change of roles in women. And how do you think you can get men to embrace a change in roles?
Well, first of all, any woman who is genuinely changing her role. That is, she's risking rejection just as men are risking rejection sexually, and she's paying just as men are paying, and she and he are sitting down at the beginning of a relationship and saying whether or not they would like to have children, and opening up to the possibility of him having to be her supporting him as much as him supporting her. Any man who rejects that is crazy, backwards, Neanderthal, because it's all in his self-interest to have a woman who is a full human being. But the message of backlash is just fundamentally an error in this one major way. What happened with the women's movement was that there was resistance the first couple of years.
Can you wrap this up in about 15 seconds?
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Then it encountered not a backlash, but a bandwagon, which has led to the political correctness, which has become part of the problem that has made the women's movement evolve very much the way communism has evolved, from a movement of equality to a movement that has become, in many ways, quite biased and totalitarian.
Well, Warren Farrell, I look forward to our next conversation.
Very good. Me with you too, Jeff.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Warren Farrell is the author of The Myth of Male Power. It's published by Simon & Schuster, and his previous book is called Why Men Are the Way They Are. Warren Farrell, an author, educator, former member of the board of the National Organization for Women. This program number is 318N if you'd like to order a copy from the radio store. That's today's date followed by the letter N. Tamara Kroll produced this program before she moved on to another one. Our production assistant tonight is Chris Matheny, and I'm Jan Weller. You're listening to the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio.
From comedy to music to history, the radio store has something for every interest. You can laugh with the radio pirates, sing along with Lou and Peter Berriman, and learn about the women who had the courage to write when you order from the radio store at 1-800-747-7444. Your radio store purchases help support programming on Wisconsin Public Radio.
Get Your Tongue Out of My Mouth, I'm Kissing You Goodbye is the title of the latest book by Cynthia Heimel. She's a satirical feminist social commentator and Jan's guest after 8 this evening. And Jean Faraka broadcast live for 2 hours this morning from the Parliamentary Room in Vilas Hall.
Have you heard it yet? Wisconsin Public Radio's newest program, Tent Show Radio. Host Warren Nelson brings you the best of last summer's Big Top Chautauqua series from the Big Blue Tent outside of Bayfield. Music, stories, comedy, and even a little history. Join us for Tent Show Radio Saturdays at 7 on Wisconsin Public Radio.
It's 8 o'clock. This is Wisconsin Public Radio Weather on the Hour. I'm Mark Karstead. Dry air should help keep the sky